Hey everyone, I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for being here for this conversation. My name is Hannah Wilson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be facilitating this conversation tonight with Catalleya, Neve, and ChrisTiana. Like Megan said, the intention of this conversation is to recognize the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and I wanted to highlight the intersection of queerness and disability with this conversation. This conversation is important to me specifically because I identify as a queer, Black, deaf, disabled woman. I was born deaf and wear a hearing aid and cochlear implant. And I'm here today because I've been on the Seattle Disabilities Commission for about a year now and joined through the YMCA program called the Get Engaged program, where a cohort of young adults are placed on different commissions to get more experience in the civic world. And that's where I met Nate, who helped organize this event for us tonight. Before we get started, I wanted to make a few thank yous. I wanted to thank our sponsors, the Seattle Disabilities Commission, the Seattle LGBTQ Commission, for making it possible for us to compensate our speakers tonight for their time. I wanted to also thank Janet Safford and the Office for Civil Rights for their support and providing us with accommodations. And I also wanted to thank Town Hall for collaborating and helping us with the technical aspects of this presentation, and Megan for working with me to make this happen. All right, we're going to jump into it now. First, I'd like our panelists to just introduce themselves with their names, their pronouns, what they identify as, and what do they love about their identity. Take it away. Whoever's comfortable starting can go.
I'll go ahead and go first. So my name is Catalleya Storm. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as a Black, trans, deaf, Muslim person. What I love about my identity, I think, is that because I have so many different identities that intersect, I have a view of the world that is kind of like always overarching. I can't think in a silo at all just because that's who I am. And yeah, I think that's like one of the things that I personally like about myself. Other people sometimes hate it, but I like it.
ChrisTiana, do you want to go next?
You know, I feel like I was looking at Neve, like we're just like doing like. My name is ChrisTiana ObeySumner. My pronouns are they, them. I am a Black and Afro-Indigenous, specifically Obeya, Igbo, and Taino. Non-binary, gender fluid, asexual, pan-romantic, multiply disabled, autistic, and mad system. And I think what I love about it is the space to which I think I've came in as I have started to do my work of learning about my ancestors and just thinking about the stories and the messages of my elders and my ancestors, especially my grandmother, who also ensured and made it a point that I knew my medicine and my spirituality, and coming to a space where it feels like a being passed a baton in a lineage of people in this experience, which I feel like is a gift every day as I stay in a space where I can feel as liberated and free as possible in this world this year.
Hello. Sorry to be coy. I live in a small house and my partner is home and they're doing things for themselves around. So I was like, there's rustling. I don't know if folks will be distracted by that. I am Neve. My pronouns are they and them, he and him, and she and her. And I am a mixed race, Black identified, Nubian, Scottish American person, specifically Nubian as in Indigenous to Sudan. And that is, yeah, I've been playing with the ordering of Indigenous and Black because of not wanting to sound like I'm saying Afro-Indigenous. I am Indigenous African. So that's an interesting journey that I'm on. And I am trans, non-binary. I have arthrogryposis and lots of cool mental illnesses. And I am very strongly identified with being radical politically, with being a Unitarian Universalist spiritually, as well as practicing hoodoo and other forms of magic, mixed race magic. And I love all of that. I love being queer and disabled, and I love like queer, trans, BIPOC disabled community because we are brilliant and raunchy and weird and creative and cool. And literally, yeah, it's just seems like a small world, but it's very large to me and probably to y'all too. So yeah, I love everything about it.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I definitely relate with that as well. Just loving the community that I get to work so deeply with and having conversations like this that are super liberating. So our first major question for the night is, what got you started on your work as a community advocate or activist? And what are some of the things that you're working on right now?
So I think for me, like I feel like getting started as far as like an activist in what I do now started when I went to college, because I was able more so there to see a lot of the things that were like wrong about the college I was going to as far as accessibility goes. I mean, we have where, you know, a student gets injured, has a wheelchair, and they can't even get inside of their dorm kind of situation. Going to the library, you had to like go around the back, and there was a steep hill around the back. So it's like I asked for interpreters for drama because everybody's moving around. So I can't see if an interpreter is stationary, I can see the interpreter. And they were saying no, because it's not academic. It's just an elective kind of thing. So no. So then I was just like, okay, so why? Well, because money. Okay, but you guys just put in 3 new TVs. So like, money. So like I feel like that is what got me started. And then once I left that university, I went to a different university, and I met so many other activists. And I think through that process, I kind of grew myself. I went to my first like protest that was the police were there and everything. I consider it my first actual Black protest, because I've gone to protests with primarily white people and rarely police there, rarely noticed. But that was the first time like the police were there. They were just, it was obnoxious. And I think that kind of really shifted my view as far as how I utilize myself as far as activism. Now I do more so activism in like the back end, especially with COVID, because I am very scared of COVID, and I have sick grandparents. If something happens to them, I want to be able to go down there and not have to be like, well, I've been out everywhere. So I feel like I'm very much, I advocate for people getting involved in activism work on the back end. You know, there are things that you can do outside of actually going and being inside of a protest. So I do a lot of stuff around that, talking about that, talking about accessibility and queer rights and things like that. And so, yeah, so that's that's essentially what I do now and how I got started, I guess.
Um, I relate to a lot of that, especially the experience of uh, attending a protest where people, including myself, were being responded to as Black people and people of color. Because I grew up in a really, really small, rural, white town. And I had the experience of like me, myself, individually being treated strangely, but I couldn't put my finger on it because a lot of the people in my life couldn't tell me what was happening. Um, and then later I was like, oh, I understand. It's all of these intersections of responses people are having to my body. But I feel like I started thinking about anti-oppression and doing that kind of activism in terms of having folks unpack and dismantle dynamics between one another when I was a teenager, because I was really involved with my local district of Unitarian Universalist youth. And I am now a youth advisor for high school aged youth. So it's like this wild, cool, full circle moment. But Unitarian Universalist youth are really radical and they're always just like on the cutting edge of stuff. And so I feel like I understood a really distinct distillation of anti-oppression politics and beliefs and values at like 13 or 14, and I feel really grateful for that. Then I feel like I had to kind of repeat that experience over and over again as I got older, because it was like I learned it too early and needed to be sort of like put in my place several times before I owned that with confidence. Now my activism looks a lot like paradigm shifts, ways to receive one another better and deeper, ways to love one another better and deeper. I do a lot of that through art and performance and creating and facilitating spaces, like dance spaces, dance education spaces, and advocating that all performance spaces should be accessible to anyone who wants to be in them, direct them, attend them, cheer them on, do tech for them, all of the aspects, because folks, I'll say non-disabled folks, folks without disabled community often only think of one side, like audience accessibility or performer accessibility or backstage accessibility. I mean, I'm giving a lot of credit, honestly. It's usually just like one thing, you know? Yeah. And I will also admit that like I don't feel like I was really radicalized around my disability until I was in my 20s. And I'm in my 30s now. And so it feels in many ways still fresh, even though I know that I'm seen by many as someone who's been like being involved with disability justice for a long time. But it still feels like, wow, I was born a whole disabled person and didn't feel like I could name my experiences around that until I was in my 20s. So.
So I think I had to narrow it down before this to 3 pivotal moments that led me to this work. The first sort of pivotal moment is being autistic, and that's when you're born autistic, and just starting to go through the public education system as a Black AFAB autistic child of a single parent without a degree and state insurance. And I am an 80s baby, and the ADA was in 1990. So I was coming into school at that intersection when I mean, this policy was just written, and then there's a whole conversation about disability rights and civil rights models and equality models and how it's not doing a thing. And then there's also this parallel conversation about the fact that just because likely it's some white cis man who signs a piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean that that piece of paper goes into it's not like there's a magical fog that goes across the land and everyone wakes up the next morning. They're like, I think I'm supposed to not be ableist today. So we're still sort of dealing with that. And as I was just trying to live my best life, there were so many times when I was like, you're not playing right. And I'm like, what in the heck is that supposed to mean? Like, you're playing house and you're trying to bring in things like taxes for bills. And I'm like, well, this is, first of all, I mean, I think, you know, growing up in a family, not only that has been under resourced, living in social housing, but also a family of entrepreneurs in fields of entrepreneurship that have continued to be criminalized, that need to be decriminalized. And so it's been frustrating to be able to actually be held. And so I started my life in the sort of way of like, why? Like, does no one else see the level to which your social construct and we're just making all of these rules up? It doesn't make any sense. So I've always sort of had this foundational piece. Second pivotal piece of this is that I also was born, or at least throughout my entire understanding of life, like if you are part of my community, you would say that I have the spirit, the gift written on my bones to be able to commune and communicate with my ancestors in a way that other folks see as a gift. And I was a gift. It was something that as a kid, it's like, hey, ChrisTiana, I will buy you a Happy Meal if on the way there you tell me about the sort of dreams you had this week. And that was sort of how I was brought up in the experiences that I had until I got to school again. It was really middle school, but it kind of culminated into high school around stimming, or what they would call dissociating, what I would call meditating, what they would call hallucinating, what I was calling convening. And when they were saying I was having some sort of God complex, it was me feeling that I was obligated to share with my peers any sort of visions or messaging that I was receiving. And all of these things led to the DARE officer, which was a thing at the time, to continue to take me out of class and talk screen me at the hospital because I must be on drugs. And when those talk screens continue to come back negative, it led to a different sort of conversation, which led to about 7 years total of involuntary psychiatric treatment, including hospitalization and medication against my will. Now, I'm not saying this in the terms of saying this is not a resource or a tool that people need and seek and access. That is not the point. The point is that even if you have like a delicious rum with honey and maraschino cherries, if you're going to force it into my mouth in 5-point restraints, it's not necessarily going to be something I'm going to enjoy. So I think it's important to have a conversation about the school to institutionalization pipeline in particular, which I think gets lost in this sort of conversation around how Black children, especially in my case, being a Black AFAB, mad, autistic person of size, was also a whole thing. And I think we need to also talk about fat phobia and how that intersects with misogynoir. So as I was trying to move into a space away from the psychiatric vortex that I was getting stuck in, because it's a whole institution that's specifically designed to keep you. And Washington is the 7th state that I've lived in. So when this was happening, it started in Philly and followed me to Louisville, Kentucky. So I have an LMPD story. I don't know if we have time for it today, but I came to Seattle, which leads to my final sort of major point, through DVR, as I was in the sort of clubhouse style day program for the severely and persistently mentally ill, is what they said, which I was supposed to be there for 20, 30 years based on the participants. They I learned about DVR, and they were like, no, you're too disorganized and it wouldn't be a good idea. But I fought for it, and then I had to do what I had to do, which I won't go into in the recorded Zoom, but I did what I had to do to get through and get my associate so I could transfer to a different school, which is how I got to Seattle through Seattle U. To this day, I still have PTSD when I hear police, although I don't think that y'all have it where the police can just come and knock on your door at 2:00 in the morning and drag you off to a 72-hour hold somewhere in the middle of the country, but I still have those nightmares. And so as I've been trying to sort of get into that space in 2015 and leading up to that, I, um, through a series of actions that was taken while I was really, really deep into an eating disorder that, again, because of fat phobia in the medical system, they just sort of worsened by insisting that all of the things I was doing with my eating disorder was positive, and in order to help me along, they would give me a gastric bypass. So they did that, and I acquired some disability that has impacted my ability to do a lot of things. Where the sort of rubber hit the road in terms of what I'm doing now, not as a consultant, which essentially was because I had to put a tax structure on being paid for my community organizing, which is its own capitalist BS. I was dealing with this situation where, as my symptoms came on of whatever it is that this is, they said it's POTS, they said it's MS, they said it's all kind of different sort of things, but really what they say the most is that it's psychosomatic. And it doesn't necessarily help me to actually get the care and treatment that I need, let alone that as I was trying to start my career in social work and direct social service and housing justice, that I was being told that the way that I showed up at work in my fullness and wholeness was not enough to match their white supremacist productivity culture. And so I found myself in a situation where I needed to continue to speak out about the intersectional and not only intersectional injustices that people experience on the daily, and not just the overt Kentucky racism, but the covert, well-meaning, nice Seattle racism, and the ways in which it's insidious through all of our institutions and our policies and our systems, and our history and our administration and our actions and our behaviors and our constructs and our paradigms, and it's all products of people. And I think that if we could have a very serious conversation about why humans human and why we continue to hold on to constructs that we know are genocidal and eugenic, then perhaps we can start to dismantle and reconstruct an equitable society from the ones that we have constructed and continue to hold and perpetuate to this day. So the work that I do now is perhaps my life's work is trying to not only co-create that, but advocate for that. And I don't know if it's going to happen. I have a lot of hope with that optimism. I don't think it's, neither a sprint nor a marathon. I think it's a relay race. And I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I know I'm going to have to do as much as I can before I pass on that baton. But I do think that I'm rooting for us, and this year in some ways has given me some hope, but also we really just don't got time for BS anymore. So abolitionism all the way. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I resonated with so much of that. It got me thinking about how when I was younger, my IEP, or my individualized education program, was really difficult for myself and my parents to navigate. And my parents actually ended up having to sue my school district just to make sure that I wasn't being taken out of class and being held back. And so yeah, it's just really difficult to prove that I am, just as smart and knowledgeable and able to participate in class while also having certain access needs. It's yeah, like you said, like the ADA did not all of a sudden just solve all of our problems. It has, required and still requires like tons of work and in terms of like applying it, and like Neve mentioned, just like it goes beyond access. It goes, it's about community and care and all of that. So for our next question, just want to make sure like we are able to all speak in a timely manner, so we can get to them. So what issue pertaining to those who have a disability and identify as LGBTQ do you think is most overlooked and is important to you? And then maybe just to like add on to it, like how has this year with 2020, COVID, Black Lives Matter, election, and anything else sort of like highlighted that and maybe like changed your work? So whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
I actually have no, I don't want to say it's succinct yet, but I have thoughts that are connected. Let's go. Okay. So I feel like something that is overlooked a lot and not seen as an issue that necessarily pertains specifically to queer and disabled communities, but I definitely experience it to be, is sex work and the necessity of the like legalization and decriminalization, but also legalization of sex work of all forms, because actually legalizing sex work would make it a lot easier, in my opinion, to actually track and deal with trafficking in a different way that is harm reductionist and not punitive, not putting people in prisons for trying to survive the way that they tried to survive. And I know that specifically 2020 is a year when I have had to definitely get back into online sex work, in terms of paying myself to exist, because you have to pay to exist in this country and in this world. And something that is very difficult as a disabled person, as a Black person, as a visibly queer person in many ways, is like being able to get and maintain certain kinds of jobs that, like, yes, they'll say, oh, like, we have these accommodations for you, but sometimes they'll fight you on those accommodations. Sometimes they will decide that the category of thing that you need is not actually an accommodation that they have to provide. There's just like all of these things. And then there's time. Oh my God, I cannot hold down a lot of kinds of jobs because of time and because of the reality and the likelihood that I will be late always because of my delicious combo of marginalized identities that make me have a relation. I really related to what you were saying, ChrisTiana, but like my relationship to time is the way that I think time actually exists, which is like in loops and squiggly doos and spirals, but it's like lots of other people are living on this linear perception wavelength, and I can't jive with that too well, because people feel disrespected by my lateness, and it's not disrespect at all in my heart. So there is something really kind of miraculous about being self-employed, about being able to set your own time frame and set your own limits as much as you can. And I know a lot of queer disabled people who like have just kind of eventually or really early on, either one, like come to some form of sex work as something that is like the most accessible way for them to make money. And so that's a really important issue to me. And 2020, this interesting, strange time, has definitely deepened my values. It has made me feel really kind of like cheered on in my values, but that has not necessarily soothed my loneliness and feeling of like isolation and fear, because I'm like, ooh, yes, like we're all crackling up and doing cool stuff, but then also the Nazis are like, I'm also here. And it just is like, whoo, it's like the most anticlimactic climax. It's like we're like peaking continually, but we're also like we're all in our homes and maybe nothing is happening. I don't know. It's like a strange uh polarity there. But I definitely feel like stoked that this year has made some people more radical in a positive way, in like a life-giving way, in a human loving way. That gives me hope. So, but yeah, no, I feel like super correct, I would say. Like 2020 proved that I'm right. So but yeah, also has deepened and strengthened a lot of my convictions and given me in some ways time to deal with what accountability looks like to me, to deal with what healing from trauma looks like to me, and actually like realizing and knowing that I, despite being as marginalized as I am also capable of like harming other people. I'm also capable of not knowing things. And so I have just kind of like opened myself up to this being like a lot of learning. It's like a buffet of learning right now, and I'm stoked. Um, yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that affect queer and disabled people, but I mean, I really think that like how we make money is a really big thing. How we live with one another, how we relate to one another, the fact that like uh, there is much more of a like a pod and created family and created systems of interdependence kind of mentality amongst queer disabled folks. And I think a lot of uh, non-queer, non-disabled people could definitely take a page out of our books. So, yeah.
So I would say for me, I know like a lot of people talk about like many different things that are like more pressing, but I feel like something that is really pressing is history, because a lot of disabled LGBTQA history is lost to time. And I feel like what a lot of people aren't realizing is right now we need to be documenting, we need to be collecting data, we need to have that history preserved, and then if we can find any history that is already preserved in a way, like how can we bring that to now where people are learning about it and things like that. This I don't think has to do with LGBTQA in general, but one of the things I was thinking about is, as a deaf Black person, there's not a lot about deaf Black history. A deaf history is told through a white lens. And so I did a speech thing on deaf Black history, and it was so hard to find history there. And one of the things that I recently came across that's happening now currently is an actor by the name of CJ Jones. He's a deaf actor. He is creating a sign language for a movie. Like, spoken languages are created all the time. You've got Avatar or whatever, like not the blue Avatar or whatever, not the Avatar Airbender. Obviously, I don't watch very much. Okay. But like, that's history that a lot of people aren't knowing is being made right now, And so I think about what history can I preserve now and pass on now that will inspire, people who are disabled, LGBTQ, of a minority, a melanated minority, can they have that history told to them and feel inspired to do things, you know? Think about when oh gosh, Hidden Figures came out. So many people, so many Black people were just like, oh my gosh, that's so inspiring. Like, I left the movie theaters crying. Obviously, there's some issues with that movie as well, but like, just to know that history, you know, is inspiring. And so I feel like that's one thing that a lot of people don't think about, is documenting the intersecting identities, not just the singular.
So I think an issue that pertaining to those who have a disability and identify as LGBTQIA+ are overlooked, I think, is kind of all in a big ball. But I would say marriage equity, reproductive justice, and like just sex positivity. Like, y'all know disabled people have sex, right? Like, that's a thing. People do it. And people who are disabled have sex that is not heterosexual. It's also a thing. There are also disabled folks who identify as asexual. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have sex. And so that's important to know, that asexual people can still have sex. And there is also a whole thing about that. There are ways in which that things like sex toys can be an accommodation. Like, if you have a postural disorder, for example, a sex swing is a great way to ensure that you can have sex in a way that also doesn't make you faint. These sort of discussions really need to happen. So not only is there less sort of stigma and sort of this like ew idea, especially with disabled folks, and I'm not just talking about cis het folks, I'm talking about everyone. You know, I think that it's important to already be thinking about disabled folks as sexual beings, so that when you go to the Wild Rose with your cane, you're not looked at as if it's going to be some sort of thing that someone has to accommodate. Like, there's actually like, hey, this is a cool thing. And so I'm not saying that this is something that is all like, no, I take it back. This is something that is extremely systemic, and everyone needs to talk about it. I think it's also important to have reproductive justice for disabled folks who are LGBTQIA+. You know, there's also things like marriage that we like to do. And I think that making sure that we don't have to lose our insurance or our benefits over that is also very, very important. That we can find, you know, that we can be held, especially as you go into that whole like married couple meets married couple thing at these intersections, and that that we're not having to explain the fact that yes, all of these different sort of things can be happening in one time. I think it was Audre Lorde that says we're not single issue beings because we don't live single issue lives. I think that as we are seeing in Washington State, having more comprehensive sex education is very important, and it also needs to be intersectional, and it also has to include sexual education as accessible for everyone, including children with IDD, because yes, people with IDD is also going to want to have sex. And other people, as they learn about sex education, are going to perhaps have sex with disabled people, non-cis het sex with disabled people. So I think that all of these things are very, very important. It needs to go all the way up, not just to the doctors, because that's too easy. And the medical system has to go all the way up to people who have resource holding, who are policymakers, who are police officers. I mean, if we have police officers, because why should we have police officers? But any sort of a community public safety official should also know this as they are working with those people. And I think that what's really frustrating is that it is 2020, and I've been saying this is like the master class of inequity this entire year. I feel like there's really nothing left for anyone to feign ignorance about anymore. If there is anything that is the most frustrating thing about me as a consultant, is that as a consultant, my organization, I know at least myself that last year I had to easily give at least 20 implicit bias trainings, at least 20. I had to have given at least like 10 to 20 DEI 101 trainings. And I can't even begin to count how many anti-racism trainings. disability justice versus disability rights trainings. And, this is not something that's new. I know people know the vocabulary. I know people know the theory. People will sit there and they'll quote, Angela Davis to me. And what we really need people to do is to do the thing. This is what we need people to do. This is the time to take the knowledge that has been built and put it to practice and take that risk so that we can move this along, because knowledge building ad infinitum is not going to lead to change. It just isn't. And fulfilling whatever your intrapersonal idea and construct of who a good person is without actually doing any of the actions of being a good person is also not going to bring about the change that we need to do. So what I have been doing is not just, lip service to other people, but lip service to myself, because I think that is also a very imperative thing that we all need to do, is inventory ourselves and organize ourselves and our privileges and where we are and our critical consciousness and how we move about space and impact space. Because we're an interdependent society, and as much as you may not want to think about it or like it, and no matter what all the old white dudes told you in the Enlightenment period, we really do have to work together here. So I really hope that this year that people actually see that we are in a very tedious time. I think even if we're just looking at it from climate disaster, the UN says we have like 8 years. We just ain't got time for this. We really need to do this in a way, and when I say this in a way, the last thing I will say, when I'm saying that we need to do this, I'm not saying in a sense of urgency that is fulfilling the white supremacy culture ideal of how we have to go through this. I'm saying that we need to hold the fact that there is work that's going to have to get done right now, and that work is very Sisyphusian and that you are not going to complete it in your lifetime. You're just not. But it doesn't mean that you give up hope and then you don't do the thing, because we really need people to do the thing. And we need people to do the thing in a very proactive, innovative way, because I am very much of the idea that if there was anything that we were going to do that was going to work, it may have been a thing that we would have utilized by now as a tool, while also holding the fact that the Civil Rights Act was 57 years ago and racism alone is like a 600 plus year issue. So both and I think is what 2020 is showing me right now.
Thank you all for your answers. I love them so much. I wish we could talk about this for hours. Before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind the audience that y'all should submit questions, and in the next 5 minutes or so, we'll start to transition over to the Q&A with the audience. So before we do that, we'll go to our last question for the panelists that I have. And so I want y'all to, in as succinct way possible, maybe 2 to 4 sentences, how can our audience and folks who are not disabled or not LGBTQIA be better allies? I know ChrisTiana sort of touched on this already, but yeah, how can people do better, essentially?
So I would say one way that you can be a better ally, and for me, whenever I talk about ally, I like to tell people ally means that it's something that somebody else gives to you. It's not what you give to yourself. So you have to make sure that that person believes you're an ally, or that group feels you're an ally. But I think when you're going to protests, are there interpreters? What can you do to try and see that they get interpreters? Are they going very fast when they're walking? Who's being left behind? I've been in protests where there's people way, way far behind because people are speed walkers up in front. Is their path actually during construction? Are you going to have to get in the road? All these things. Are there going to be chairs for elderly people? And think about that not only at protests, think about that in meeting groups, in our restrooms all on first floor, all these different things that you can think about, even though you might not be someone with a disability. And as for LGBTQA stuff, talk about people who aren't LGBTQA, think about, are you introducing with your pronouns? You have pronouns. I'm sorry, you have pronouns. Everybody uses pronouns unless you're using your name. So, introduce with your pronouns. There are things that you can do, and it's just stepping outside of who you are and thinking about the other people.
Kind of piggybacking on thinking about, starting with yourself in terms of checking in with yourself, like, what do you need? I think that people often think of access needs when they're not disabled or when they don't know what their disabilities are, which I think is more often the case, especially if you're a person of color. You got PTSD. So, newsflash, you're disabled as well. I think that people tend to think outside themselves rather than looking inside and saying, like, what would actually make this experience like safe, fun, functional, accessible, and like affirming for me. Checking in with that, and then checking into what things other people might need, and realizing that like you probably don't have everything covered, and that is cool because it means that you have room to grow, and you should always be interested in growing. I also think just being invested in upping your emotional pain tolerance if you are someone who has not had to endure a lot of emotional pain in terms of how you move through the world. On SNL, like this past weekend, they had this fake ad for 5-hour empathy, and it was like, you can just drink the 5-hour empathy, and this like white cis guy was like, all I have to do is drink it, and then I'll feel all of this pain that other people feel that I don't. And then he's like, oh, okay, I have stuff to do. And it's like the easiest thing. So I agree with ChrisTiana in the sense that like things that have no information can really get you to the point of like choosing to act in solidarity with other people. You have to decide that that's what you want to do all the time. And then you have to feel that, and you have to realize that whatever empathetic pain you're feeling for someone else who has an identity that is marginalized that you don't have, they're feeling it 10 times worse. So you're going to be okay. We're all I maybe be okay. I don't know. I mean, it's like a maybe, but I think we'll try. Let's do it.
I just have a quick challenge. I'll end with a challenge. First, you should follow all of us that are on this panel on the internet. And then once you do that, because we would know people who are also disabled LGBTQIA plus folks, and I want you to follow those people also on the internets, as many as you possibly can, perhaps up to 50. And then I want you to just read without responding, read what they post for 6 months. And as you're reading it, I want you to reflect on it. I want you to read the comments, see how people resonate. I want you to read the rebuttals, see how people have discourse. And I want you to consider the topics that are being brought up, the perspective and the lenses on certain issues that are happening in the current events, and the ways in which people, because trust me, they're talking about it constantly, that people are making calls to action for how you can be an ally. That could possibly be not only the most self-directed way, but also perhaps also the most holistic way to get a finger on the pulse by actually listening to the leadership and the narratives that are being amplified in your timeline. And now your algorithms are getting changed around too, which is also a great thing. And so you'll get access to more things as Google or whatever it is that you use start to learn that you're trying to expand the horizons of and the gaps in understanding and knowledge, if there is any. So that would be my call to action for you. And if you are in a space where you come to another space like this, then, and you start to ask questions or you're looking for more information, to do that consensually, which means ask at least 3 times, hey, can I ask you an awkward question? Hey, can I ask you an awkward question about disability justice? Hey, can I ask you about this specific question about disability justice? 3 times consent, and then compensate them for their labor. That is my call to action for you.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, y'all better get to work. I also recommend folks check out this book called Care Work by Leah Lakshmi. That's sort of where I got my first language for disability justice and care work, and how do we nourish and see our community for everything that it is, and make sure that everyone is safe and seen and spoken for. Basically, how are we gonna make sure that our community can rely on each other and not the state that has continually for the all of time not provided what we needed, even with the ADA we're not getting what we need. So how do we provide that for ourselves, and how are you going to do that for everyone in your community and also for yourself? So now it's time for the Q&A. Please fire away with some questions. We have a couple questions already in the lineup that I'll bring up. One person asks, how can mass protests such as Black Lives Matter be more inclusive for disabled and queer folks? And maybe what are ways that people can protest for those reasons?
Well, I can speak from being deaf and going to protests. It wasn't until I moved to where I live now that there was interpreters at protests without me getting up on stage and demanding it. I literally, at the place I was before here, I literally was at the first women's march in that area with over 4,000 people. And I sneakily made my way onto stage because there was no interpreters. So my friend's partner was turned facing us, mouthing what was being said so that we could read their lips to get what was being said. So I got on there and I demanded interpreters, and I got called all kinds of words online by people, but it's what it is. And they had interpreters the next year. But here I had interpreters, and for the first time I had a Black interpreter. And it's so much different to be at a Black Lives Matter protest, having a Black interpreter who can interpret, the way that Black people talk, the way that we speak, things like that. And so it's those little things that's really important to me. And I'm only going to speak from being deaf because that's the thing that impacts me the most when I go to protests.
A suggestion that I've been trying to, that I think has really worked really well in my experience, not just since, but in the past, has been it's cool to have the demonstrations, which I think is an extremely important part of it, and sort of the pieces that require you to sort of show up to somewhere. And at the end of the day, that demonstration is leading towards some sort of ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal might be to change a policy, or to end gentrification in a certain area, or to defund the police, whatever that may be. There are going to likely have to be other sort of strategies that are taken anyway in order to get to that goal that isn't going to necessarily be standing outside. So in those other sort of things, breaking those down, creating sort of a larger plan and breaking them down into what are the strategies towards this universal goal that's going to require certain sort of skills, and just have it based on that. It doesn't even have to be down to, well, what can we do for disabled folks? I mean, first of all, hopefully in your coordinating and leadership committee, you are paying disabled folks at the intersections to be in leadership and is helping you with this plan and strategy. And so they are also going to be able to share the different sort of ways to approach this in a way that isn't offensive and ableist. But I think that having those different sort of strategies and options for people, and an opt-in option for people so that they can participate in a way that is as autonomous and spontaneous as possible, while also being able to access what they need. And so having that, whether that's writing white papers, if there's wonks like me, whether that's sending out social media blasts, whether that's emailing people, whether that's talking to their friends, whether that's making art, whether that's like whatever that may be, having those different sort of strategies in the way that people can work towards a universal goal without necessarily having to risk their health and safety going outside.
I mean, I don't have to answer this one. I feel like yes. So I'm into everything that has been said. So
Cool. Well, I think it is time for us to wrap it up. Um, I guess I also want to give y'all a chance to sort of like say one last word if you'd like. I'm gonna have the tech person uh, push out y'all's handles, but like definitely before we go, how can like people um, find you, get in contact with you, read your information, be more radicalized, and all of that? Yeah.
okay. I think well, one, my sort of parting words are like uh be really, really, really creative. Like be more creative and more weird than you think you have any right to be, because I think only through doing that will you connect to the people who also want to change the world. And I am really realizing that like I don't have to limit myself via what I think is the next possible step. I can actually just like think about where I want to be, where I want to go. And I think that that is like a really brilliant point that ChrisTiana made of like, what is it that you actually want to do? And like, what are all of the like myriad ways that you could get to that place? Also just like queer porn, just watch queer porn. That's my opinion. You can follow me on Neve Be Bad. Neve Be Bad on everything, pretty much. Twitter and Instagram are the most active. But I also have a Patreon and a website, and yeah, all that. Pretty much Neve Be Bad is where you'll find all the stuff. So yeah.
Oh, I'm having trouble with the mic. So I would say I just want to, my parting words going back to how to be inclusive for Black Lives Matter. Find your local National Black Deaf Advocates chapter. National Black Deaf Advocates has been doing so much work, and here's the reason: because National Black Deaf Advocates started because the NAD, the National Association of the Deaf, would not allow Black people. The NAACP would not allow accessibility. So the National Black Deaf Advocates was started, and that was started in the 80s. So it was still not accessible in NAACP and not really inclusive in the National Association for the Deaf. So I say team up with that, your chapter, find it. As far as social media, my handle on Instagram is Catalleya Storm, CATALLEYA, Storm as an X-Men. I'm kind of sad I put blue hair in because I should have done white, so for Halloween, but anyway. I also have YouTube channel, so I haven't been posting on there because a friend of mine passed away, so I've been kind of distant from there, but I hope to pick it back up this coming month for National Novel Writing Month. I am a writer, and yeah, that's how you can find me. If you go to www.catalleyastorm.com, I do have a link that you can click on that talks about Black Deaf history, and it has Black ASL because there's a Black American Sign Language, It has like people that you can learn about. So I really want to get Black Deaf history out there. And I have a privilege because I'm able to speak. A lot of Black Deaf individuals have been speaking up about this who don't voice, who use sign language only. And I feel like it is a disservice for me not to say, they're already saying this, you're just listening to me. So go check it out.
Yes. My parting words. One of the things that I hold in myself, especially, and this is, I think, for no matter where you are in your journey and who you are in this journey, especially this year, I've been really thinking back. My grandma used to speak a lot in metaphors, which I think is why I speak a lot in metaphors. And one of the metaphors my grandma told me, one time when I was really, really sad and we were going through a really hard time and we were facing housing instability, it was a whole thing. And my grandma said, "You know what's so weird about seeds?" And I said, "What's weird about seeds, Grandma?" And she said, "Well, when you cultivate seeds, you really try to keep them as whole and pristine as possible. But the weird thing about it is that you have to put it in the ground and then it has to be destroyed. It breaks apart. And if it doesn't break apart, then it can't push through the soil. It can't get out of the darkness. It can't see the light. It cannot grow. It cannot flower. It cannot bear fruit. It cannot make more seeds." So, in order to continue to push things not only to a place of growth, but to a place of fruition and to a place that we can actually move this and spread it so that it can start to grow on its own, we're going to have to break apart. And I think that in this year, it's been really difficult in my space to feel it, both figuratively and literally. I feel like feel myself breaking apart. And I think that while I always say I have hope without optimism, I do have hope that as we move forward together in solidarity, in collective solidarity, that I'm really hoping that the garden that we grow will be not only a beautiful one, but one that will that we can finally be liberated and free. Um, you can find me on all the social medias. My name is ChrisTiana. It is spelled like Christian with an A at the end because that's literally what it is in Spanish. So ChristiAna. And then my last name is a mashup of two married people. So the first one is my maiden name, which is Obey, which is spelled like obey, Obey. And the last part is spelled like Sumner, like the town in Pierce County. So SUM as in Mary, N as in Nancy, ER. You put that name into Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Google, you'll find me. Also, if you would like me to do anything from come to your organization, government, or nonprofit and talk about how you can be more equitable in a proactive, collective way, with, of course, some of the best practices, but we can also talk about those best practices and some other perhaps strategies, whether that is audits and assessments to trainings. You can go to epiphaniesofequity.com. And you can also go to epiphaniesofequity.com or ChrisTianaObeySumner.com, and it'll take you to the same place. If you would also like me to do any sort of speeches or emceeing or spoken word, because that's also a thing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much. This conversation was so beautiful to witness and be a part of. Thank you guys for your time. And thank you to the audience for being here with us. I wanted to thank all the commissions again, the Seattle Disabilities Commission, the Seattle LGBTQ Commission, and Town Hall for hosting this event and making this possible. And I hope y'all in the audience continue to follow the work that all these amazing people do and continue this radical work that has already been started. Yeah, thank you all and good night.